Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name's Dr. James Gill and join me for what might be a controversial video. As I'm sure many of you are aware of, there are now these devices called continuous glucose monitors that you can get hold of, which can monitor your blood sugars, or sort of monitor your blood sugars. What these specifically do is actually monitor the interstitial fluid, the sugar in the space between your cells, rather than actually in the blood. Now, don't get me wrong, blood glucose monitors are old tech and they're great tech. They're the cornerstone of our diabetes care, because whatever we can measure, we can manage. But then that also comes to the question of whether or not we should be measuring something. Now, there are, every Tom, Dick and Harry on the internet will tell you that CGMs are the next big thing. And they've been saying that for quite some time. And Sinocare reached out and said, would they be interested, or would I be interested in sponsoring a video? And I said yes, on the agreement that the sponsorship involved 20 of these that I can then hand out to you guys. So the point being is, should you use a continuous glucose monitor? And the honest answer is probably like the Baz Luhrmann sunscreen. Be careful whose advice you buy. So probably not. Unless maybe. What do I mean by that? If you are a healthy individual with nothing wrong with them, this probably is not going to change your life, and in fact could actually harm you, because you're perhaps going to end up fixating on a number that doesn't matter to you. Now, the reason why I say it doesn't matter, because this is not measuring your blood sugar, but is measuring the sugar between the cells in your tissues, not finger pricks. There's quite a lag in terms of you doing something, and that's going to be a crucial thing, and or eating something, and the effect on your blood sugar. Hold on, let me rephrase that, because that's the crux of these devices. There's going to be a lag between you doing or eating something and the detection of that glucose spike on the continuous glucose monitor, because it is not a blood glucose monitor. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still going to be a bit of a lag with regard to blood glucose monitoring, but it's not going to be, in the hours that we can see with these things. So why is that important? When we get a newly diagnosed diabetic, or perhaps somebody with a slightly raised HbA1c, so this is a marker of how much sugar is stuck to our red blood cells, and the more sugar we have in the body, the more it sticks to our red blood cells, and it's an indicator of good glycemic control. So in terms of the numbers we need to be aware of, between 42 and 48 millimoles per litre puts us at pre-diabetes. These are the patients who I really want to try and turn around their trajectory, because they're heading for a very serious illness. If you're over 48, then you have diabetes, and we really need to be helping these people manage the disease that they have, and potentially, that word is doing an awful lot of lifting, try to find a way to turn it around and reverse it so they are biochemically not diabetic anymore. There's a debate to be said as to whether or not you get your HbA1c below 48. Are you still diabetic, or just an incredibly well-controlled one? But that's not what we're discussing here today. So they're two patients who might be a benefit here. But if you are general schmo who has no health problems as far as you're aware, this probably isn't going to be helpful and might be harmful. Now, I say probably because, in my opinion, you can do some really cool experiments with these, which can be useful for healthy people. The one that I have done, which has changed how I live my life, is with regard to how I eat, not necessarily what I eat. So, again, going back to the fact that there is a lag with these, one of the things that you can do is eat a unit of carbohydrate, i.e. a bagel, and you'll see an hour or two later the glucose level will increase. you can the following day eat some Greek yogurt. Not Greek style yogurt, because that's a marketing ploy, but actual Greek yogurt. And a couple of hours later, you'll see much less of an increase. You've got to make sure that you're eating equivalent amounts. The third day, eat the bagel 20 minutes later and then have the yogurt. And again, you'll see that spike on the monitor. On the fourth day, however, if you eat the Greek yogurt and then 20 minutes later the bagel, you do not get the same spike. You get a much blunting to the curve. Now, that sounds like this whole blunt the curve hypothesis, that blood sugar spikes are inherently evil. They're not, okay? They're a normal part of life. If you're particularly stressed, you go into fight or flight mode, your body needs sugar, you're going to get a glucose spike, even if you haven't been eating, because your body will prepare you for that. If you're very stressed, if you're not sleeping well, all of those things will lead to rises in your blood glucose. And that's why it's important that we try to help a patient look at the whole of their life, not just what goes into their mouth. Now, I hurriedly highlight that what goes into your mouth is still crucially important. And when it comes to weight loss, we say that weight loss is done in the kitchen, not in the gym. So that is vitally important. But how is this going to potentially help or harm? Well, by showing how the order in which I eat foods adjusts the effect on my glucose levels, I have found it means that I do not get quite as ravenously hungry. Now, I want to be really clear, I'm not changing the food that I'm eating, I'm changing the order. So, for example, you go to a restaurant, have a starter that's potentially more fibrous, it's got more fats to it, and then I'm going to have my my main meal that's got plenty of chips to it, all the stuff that I like. I've not changed what I'm eating, I've changed how I'm eating. So that is how I have used this, and I think that's reasonable to, use one of these for 2 weeks, have a play with it and see what information you get. Should you be buying one of these as a normal person and using it day in, day out to rule your life? Absolutely not. Not only is it going to end up with somebody who's fixated on a number that, as I say, is hugely affected by the environment as much as anything else, these things aren't cheap, and they're not going to be giving you anywhere near the level of benefit that you would think that you get for the price, and also for what people are going to tell you on social media. So if you're a normal person, it's fun to mess around with one for a week or two. Bear in mind, each of them has a 14-day battery life. If you've got no other health problems, don't go anywhere near it. Now, then we get to the grey zones of people who I think these could be useful for. Personally, I try to ride my diabetic patients quite hard. I really want to help them. I basically have an open door policy and say, come in, we'll talk about these things. Let me try to help you. Let's get a good monitoring on your HbA1c. Now, there's a crucial thing with monitoring HbA1c. It's slow, which these kind of go against the concept for. You can only repeat the HbA1c, so a marker of how your diet has been, a marker of how your exercise has been, a marker of how your health has been, a marker of how your diabetes has been every 3 months, because that's how long it takes a red blood cell to be created from the bone marrow, come out, do its thing in the body, and then be die off and cleared. It'll be 3 months that sugars will stick to that red blood cell. So if you have a patient who's diabetic and I magically cured their diabetes, absolutely perfectly cured their diabetes, their HbA1c would not significantly change until 3 months had passed and we had replaced their existing red blood cells that were crammed on the surface full of sugar. So again, this is a 2-week thing. I'm looking at it hourly, daily. No, actually, our big diabetic numbers are long-term trends. And this might help with that trend for you. So if you're very concerned that you're in a pre-diabetic zone, trying to reduce the spikes of blood sugar that you are, how to put it, that you are, I don't want to say responsible for, because that sounds like we blame people for their conditions. Perhaps that you are able to adjust is a better phrasing. Then this can be worthwhile. Again, I go back to thinking about diet, go back to thinking about exercise, go back to thinking about stress. If you find that when you are pre-diabetic, that you're able to get something like this from your GP, you wear the glucose monitor, using this may be able to give you an idea about how your sleep, how good quality sleep, getting enough sleep, has an impact on your glucose in the preceding few days. Similarly, how your stress levels might improve, and you might see an improvement in your glucose levels, with meditation, with trying to adjust life, trying to reduce stresses at work by maybe sort of planning differently, maybe engaging in walks on the way to work. There's lots of little health things that we can do, but ultimately bring down your stress levels, you may see has an improvement in your glucose level. Now, with our patients who have diabetes, these things come into a very different field, and I'm not going to discuss that quite so much here because that's a different video in its own right. But ultimately, these are going to give us a really important metric for our diabetic patients of time in range, where how long have we managed to maintain a patient's blood sugars in the range that we want it, where they haven't had hypos, which, let's crank it to the max, can be deadly, all the way through to our hypers, which will be causing damage. So on that side of things, these can be really, really useful. Now, we talked about using these with regard to exercise, and I think that's going to be a really interesting point, because what I'm going to do shortly, I'm going to stick this on my arm, and you're going to join me in the garage, and we're going to go on the exercise bike. Now, if I absolutely peg it on the exercise bike for, let's go for 45 minutes, what do you think is going to happen to my blood sugar as I ride? And I'm going to do it first thing in the morning, and I've got out of bed, I will be in a fasted state, I'll have water on it, so I'm not going to be taking anything. What do you expect is going to happen to my blood sugar levels as I go on the bike? Let's have a look. Okay. Alcohol swab. Now, as we know from medical school, we go from the inside out, and then I'm going to turn over, go in and out again. And I'm actually going to leave that to dry. At this point, I'm going to remove the clip part, and then we've got the sticky bit underneath. I'm going to stick that on the side. I'm waiting for that to dry. Okay. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Oh! You know what? I think it made, and probably me, made more noise than it actually did going in. But there we go, all finished. Okay, so the sensor's on now, and actually this works out quite well. I've now got 2 hours before it's ready to go, ready to give me data or something like that. And actually, I forgot I was doing this, so I had lunch a little bit too soon ago. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this run, get it all set up, and make sure things are good. And then when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I'm going to do is get on the bike, and I'm going to do that as a fasted ride. So I should see, as mentioned, a glucose spike as I'm going along. Okay, in that case, I'll see you in the morning. Right, good morning. So we're going to put this to the test. What we're expecting to happen, given it is now 10 to 8 in the morning, is I'm going to get on the bike. I'm going to have to work for quite a while, maybe an hour or so. That should result in me using the glucose in my legs, because I haven't eaten since 8 o'clock last night, so I've got a 12-hour fast, and my glucose at the moment is 8 millimoles per litre. As my glucose levels in my legs go down, because I've used them, we're going to expect glucagon to be released from the pancreas to affect glycogen in the liver to allow my sugar levels to increase back up. That's what we're looking for. Let's see if it happens. Oh, and on an entirely separate note, if you're going to wear one of these blasted CGM things, have a think about where your clothes could get in the way. Now, I've placed mine well above the belt, but unfortunately it's rubbing on my cycling shorts. Just think, is there anything that might rub before you stick it there? Because I've got this stuck there for the next 14 days. Just a thought. Right, with that in mind, let's head to the garage. Oh, actually, on that point, it is currently 4 degrees outside. So that might add a small complicating factor. The reason being is when the temperatures are very low, and it's first thing in the morning, you can have a higher level of cortisol level, which could mean that we get a reduction in insulin release, which could mean that we don't see the effect in the sugars we're looking at. So we'll see whether or not it works, but I'm hoping that once I've warmed up on the bike, that should be taken out of the equation. We'll see. Right. Well, as you can see, there's been a brief costume change because it's jolly cold in here. But I've got the bike set up and currently I'm doing steady 150 watts. I'm going to need to get to that much higher in order to burn through the glucose that's in my blood at the moment. So let's actually have a look on the phone where we are. So currently I'm sitting there at 8.2 millimoles per litre. And what we're expecting to happen as the clock goes on and I use up the sugar in my blood, literally turning the watt bike here, the pancreas is going to see that reduction in glucose, and all the while your body wants to maintain homeostasis. So it wants to keep my sugar levels nice and normal. So what we'd expect to see is a bit of a dip, and then the pancreas will see that dip and will release glucagon. Now, glucagon from the pancreas is going to then affect the liver, and that's going to allow the liver to break down glycogen, which is going to put more sugar back in my blood to allow me to keep on pushing. So we're expecting to see, ideally, everything stay completely stable, but in reality, we'll probably see a bit of a dip because I'm literally burning sugar, and then that to come up again, even though I've only got water in this bottle and I won't be taking anything during the ride. And we'll be able to look at the work that I've done later in terms of the calories burned, because I've got a heart rate monitor on, so I know I'm sitting there at 143 beats a minute. But you can see I'm acclimatizing, so I'm holding 210 watts at that 143. So certainly in the warm-up period, it's been and gone. I can tell that because it's now getting rather warm for me anyway. Right. So I do that. Right. So I'm going to get on with this, and I will come back and talk to you guys if we see anything of news. Actually, on a mild thing, since you're here, that's interesting. So up here, my wattage is a little bit lower, but when I come forwards onto the hoods, my wattage increases. Just a small thing for you. This is because I'm recruiting different muscles when I'm cycling in different positions. So when you're out on a big bike ride and you're needing a break, change positions. It's not going to be huge, but it is going to help ever so slightly. I'm putting that in perspective, doing 240, and my heart rate has dropped down to 125. So I'm in a much more efficient position with regard to my musculature. Although, given the nature of the experiment we're doing, and I want to generate work, perhaps it would be better for me to go back to this position where it's harder for me to generate the power. Yep, I'm down to 220 now, and expecting that to push my heart rate up. It's not going to affect the experiment, but it's just an interesting thing about training a muscle position and things like that. Right, I'll see you later. Well, that was perhaps a little bit more than I expected. Right, so camera's died, which is why we're doing it on the phone now. Over that ride, I've just done 784 calories burned. My blood glucose peaked at about 8.8-ish, dropped down as low as 6.8 and finished at 7.8. So, two things to take away from this. One, not only what was expected happened, so blood sugar went up to feed my legs, blood sugar went down as I'm using my legs, and blood sugars came back up again. But because I don't have diabetes or other medical problems, I've gone back to that homeostasis. The body has tried to keep everything in balance. And I think that's really the key. If you are well, these blood glucose monitors probably aren't going to do much for you. If you are pre-diabetic, they can be very useful at helping you determine whether or not you're spiking with certain foods and look at how you're changing your lifestyle. If you're diabetic, they are massively important. But for people who don't have medical problems, they're an interesting experiment, certainly. And, you know, I love science, crack on, use these devices as a point of interest with regard to looking at your own body, but don't have these as the be-all and end-all. So I hope that's been interesting. I hope that's given you a bit of context for how these may or may not be useful. And more importantly, if you make a comment, like the video, and then in the next 48 hours, I'll randomly select a group of people to send continuous glucose monitors to you from Sinocare. And perhaps afterwards, as I say, we can get together and maybe have a large Zoom call that we film and put on the channel to see how people have done with these blood glucose monitors. To that end, cheerio, we'll see you in the next one.